One of the things that I love about travel or getting to be part of a different culture is learning the food and table etiquette. In Singapore, where we had a lovely holiday recently, we were hosted to a rather formal business lunch at a Chinese restaurant, and I found myself watching our host very carefully to make sure that I ate the foods in what seemed to be the right order and matched the right sauces and spices with the right foods. I kind of copied everything that he did. It seemed to be the safest way to go. If I was in France, I would know that I should not cut my lettuce, but fold it. In France, I know what order the cheeses should be eaten in. In our former days of diplomatic postings, when we used to host dinner parties at the High Commission in Canada, Stephen would spend lots of time working out the seating plan. Who was the guest of honour, and so who should sit where, and sometimes it was quite complicated because there could be lots of guests of honour. In Jesus' time, the sharing of meals were very structured affairs. Whether it was even a family meal or a gathering of friends or business associates, there were lots of rules. In today's reading, Jesus is invited to the house of the leader of the Pharisees, so a high-up religious leader, and he's invited for a Sabbath meal, a meal on the Sabbath day. And we know that Jesus keeps on getting himself into trouble on the Sabbath, so Luke says everyone was watching him very carefully. So this would have been a highly structured and ritualised meal in the house of someone wealthy. The meal would have been served by slaves or servants, and Jesus notes how the guests, which would have been men only, take the places of honour. There was at any of these meals a definite hierarchy of seating. The top table, or they would have been probably reclining on benches, so that the top section was reserved for the top guests, and then each table was ranked. But the trick was there wasn't a seating plan or name cards. It was much more subtle than that. When the invitation was sent out, it would have included a guest list, so you could figure out ahead of time where probably you should be seated. Then on the day of the banquet, a messenger would come with a reminder invitation, and so you could, double check the list. If you were of a humble disposition, well then you would sit low down in the pecking order. But if you were ambitious, you might try and, push up the ranks a little bit and see if you could get away with it. The risk was, of course, that your host would come and embarrass you and say, "Excuse me, would you mind moving down to this spot?" But the trouble was that the top table literally had the best food and wine, and the lower tables had cheaper food and wine, so it was definitely in your interest to get up higher. Now, at first, Jesus seems to be simply commenting on social etiquette and reminding people of their manners. It's not really a very Jesus thing to do. He quotes the book of Proverbs, "It's better to be asked, friend, come up higher, than to be embarrassed." But then he goes a bit further and he says, you shouldn't really even bother with inviting your friends to dinner because they will repay you. Indeed, all invitations were carefully reciprocated. So if you went to someone's place for dinner, you were definitely expected to invite them back. He says, instead, invite those who cannot repay you. And the language that the translators use are not really words that we would use today, words like cripple and the lame. But I wonder if the translators have deliberately left those words in there because they're a bit shocking, and because it would have been shocking for the people of Jesus' time, to suggest that someone who was ill or someone with a disability might be invited. So apologies if that language sounded a bit shocking and a bit horrible, but it's supposed to make us sit up. And then we know that they would have felt the same when Jesus says, well, those are the people you should be inviting to the table. And the listeners would have gone, what's he talking about? That's ridiculous. That would be very unsuitable. So I'm sure that the poor Pharisee leader, the host, was not at all pleased with Jesus' advice. And then I wondered, what place would Jesus have been given at the table? Would he have been put up at the top table, or would he have been put down low since he was being disruptive again? But if you think about it, meals and banquets are so often the subject of Jesus' teaching. Sometimes the banquet is the great heavenly banquet of the future. Sometimes he's talking about the way the kingdom of God should be right here, right now. And sometimes, of course, Jesus is simply gathering for a meal with his friends. But in all his meal encounters, Jesus offers a new model for living. Friend, come up higher. You who seem unsuitable, come and join us at our table. He's always been told off for eating with sinners. Come join us at our table. New Zealand writer Rosemary Dwurst says, spaciousness is something I believe Jesus invites us into. As we follow him, we are caught up into the big dreams of God, visions that have room enough for everyone, for every living thing in creation. Following Jesus, we have the opportunity to see things from God's eye view, a perspective of reconciliation and boundless hope. And we can live, even amongst the tears and the struggle, with being expectant of Kairos, the inbreaking of the Spirit who goes before us. So Jesus is challenging us to think about space and hospitality in our lives personally, in our communities, in our city, and in our world. Later on this morning, we're looking forward to hearing from two of our candidates for the mayoralty. They are seeking to serve us as a community and to lead. Whoever gets elected will indeed be given places of honour. They'll be at the top table at any function they're invited to, but they will receive that honour because they have first stepped up to serve. And they lead us in welcoming people to the table in our city, whether it's in housing or transport or climate issues, the way our city is designed. They lead us in the way that we do those things as a community. Urban planning can be done in a way that it's inclusive of everyone and not just cars. Street design these days is all about community. If you look at our new federal street design, it's all about where people sit and gather and spend time. But who gets prioritised at the planning table? That is certainly something that a mayor can influence. The writer of the letter to the Hebrews says, "Do not neglect to show hospitality to strangers, for by doing that some have entertained angels without even knowing it." The writer's referring to the time when Sarah and Abraham hosted 3 strangers or 3 angels to lunch in the book of Genesis. And those angels told them that they would have a child. And Sarah laughed and said, "Don't be ridiculous, I'm way too old." But they were right. You never know what might happen when you offer hospitality. You never know who might be there. Who might you be able to invite for a meal or to the council table? Well, we gather around a table every week. It's a table with no name places, no hierarchy. All are welcome. All are given places of honour at this table. It can stretch as long as it needs to go. So what do we learn at this table? And then what are we sent out to do from the table? Who might we be able to welcome and say, "Friend, move up higher, take my place, let me serve you"?